About 6 months ago, I started munching on these little guys and injecting this soup broth into my legs. It also just so happens that sometime after I had started my hormone replacement therapy, Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree would release, and I got to rediscover a comfort character of sorts, and learn several new details about them that I sunk all kinds of trans analogies into. Like a ton. A lot. I'd like to spend this video not so much reviewing the DLC in a traditional sense, but more so going over my experience with the main character of the DLC, Miquella, and most importantly, his discarded half, Saint Trina. Also, before starting, please note that all the trans analogies I'll be talking about in this video are headcanon, and largely just me inserting my own experience into parts of dialogue and characters that might not reflect their intended meaning, but are meaningful to me nonetheless. Back when the base game came out, I played it around release, and it being my first Souls game, I was deathly terrified of every enemy in the game. So I looked up the best weapons and offhandedly used the Saint Trina sword since the sleep buildup was quite good. This was all during a time though that I was still repressing my feelings about gender, and I didn't even know a drop of lore back then either, so it would be some time before I became fully invested in the Saint Trina character. It was when a video by Sekiro Dubai released detailing cut content of a Saint Trina questline that my intrigue would fully develop. It wasn't like a tiny offhanded questline either, there were several cut dialogue pieces and an entire Dream Mist mechanic that still isn't used anywhere in the final release of the game. Before we even knew that DLC would be coming to Elden Ring, I would learn every little drop of lore I could about Trina. Such as them heavily being hinted as being Miquella's other half, with this line from the Trina Lily description, and that Trina equals sleep. There was only a handful of items in the base game talking about Trina, and like all of them are just that Trina would put people to sleep. That is it. It was really that first sentence I showed where Trina's gender is left ambiguous that kept my interest going for some time. Although after a while, and I mean like a year or two kind of a while, my interest sort of faded away. I had other media outlets to fill my queer needs, and by the time the DLC was being promoted, I was already a few months into transitioning and had the pinnacle of queer to keep me occupied. Splatoon and Guilty Gear. So when the DLC actually released, I of course watched people play it, but I figured I'd hold off until some sort of sale or something. Yeah, it wasn't even Trina content that got me to instantly buy the DLC. When I saw the lion fight, I wanted to play it so badly for myself, so I started a new playthrough to get to the DLC, and near the start I ran into an old buddy. Knowing the DLC had a good chance of having something related to Trina, I thought it'd be fun to RP as some sort of Saint Trina knight, and I had a blast stumbling across Trina lilies all over the map. It felt like I was sorta hot on the trail of some big mystery, and it gave a meaning to my playthrough that otherwise I wouldn't have really had. When I finally entered the Realm of Shadow, I stumbled on the first of many Miquella's crosses, which are landmarks all over the map of the DLC that are left by Miquella, and over the course of my playthrough they would add several layers to my viewpoint of Trina from a trans perspective. See, initially I went into the DLC with the idea of Miquella being a closeted trans girl, and related from my own experiences with that. But after reading several cross blurbs, I saw a perspective of Miquella being a trans guy who's finally opening up and pushing past being closeted as well. The two crosses that contributed the most to this for me were the ones that said, "I abandon here all of my fears," and "I abandon here my doubt and vacillation." These read almost as someone who has some outside pressures keeping him from feeling comfortable enough to come out. There were also several crosses that I interpreted as both a trans guy and trans girl going through transitioning, namely the lines that say "I abandon here the flesh of my body," or some variant of that. I especially love the one that says "I abandon here my arm dextral." It's just a really cool way to say right arm, but it sounds so metal. Once I got far enough into the DLC, I stumbled on this giant throwing big sleeping pots, and I knew I was close to something Saint Trina related. Mind you, I'm probably 70 or 80 hours into this playthrough with anticipation building the entire time, so seeing something as out of place as this was really exciting. I ended up reaching this giant hole and started making my way down, where I stumbled across this. When I saw the purple hue of the fissure, I was 99% sure that this is where stuff related to Trina would be. But it was encountering the first enemy and seeing them use sleep attacks that made me absolutely certain. A little further in is where I found the last of Miquella's crosses and a spirit NPC next to it. These two offer dialogue that connected with me quite a lot. The spirit NPC talks about Miquella throwing away something he should not have, and continuing with how would he save others when he could not save his other half. Reading the cross reveals the final detail in the spirit NPC's dialogue, which is "I abandon here my love." I interpreted this the most from a trans girl's perspective, who's giving up her identity to remain stable in life and ultimately stagnant, repressing her feelings about gender to not lose people or comforts in the life she's currently living. And it felt like the person I was just a year ago is getting personified in a video game that I love. And I've moved far enough forward that I can look back at my past internal struggles without a ball of anxiety in my stomach. Going further into the fissure, we come across the Putrescent Knight, who's just a sick boss fight. It is really cool. And waiting past it is Saint Trina. Like the Saint Trina. The one we've been playing for 80 hours to get to. I won't lie and say that Trina's the most pivotal character in the DLC. She doesn't do much outside of poisoning you to death, which you voluntarily do like 7 times. But the dialogue she has is again quite impactful from a trans femme perspective. Listening to what she has to say felt like the subconscious of a trans girl repressing her feelings, speaking out, saying godhood would be Miquella's prison, and that you must kill Miquella and to grant him forgiveness, which sounds like it could mean ridding yourself of the person you're currently living as that isn't your true self, and to not be too hard on yourself when you finally make that jump forward. And had I not come to terms with my identity already, this definitely would have been some amount of a wake-up call for me. Ultimately, what I love so much about Souls games, and this experience in particular, is that the vagueness of their multiple storylines lets you self-insert in very meaningful ways that aren't wildly implausible. There are absolutely several other ways to interpret the Saint Trina storyline, many of which can be through another queer lens as well. And I think that's really swag. So much swag.